Familiar to because she gave us her beautiful music last night. And she is a singer-songwriter and an author and a speaker, speaking a lot on the works of Rudolf Steiner, who, of course, had a lot to do with the elemental kingdom. And Susan does live in mid-Wales, and very easy in such a beautiful place full of waterfalls and lovely mystical groves to be well away with the fairies. So she's going to talk to us today about the elemental kingdom and how it interacts with humanity. Her talk is entitled Life Forces, Elementals and the Dynamics of Intelligent Space. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a very warm welcome to Susan Raven.
So first of all, can you hear okay? Great. First of all, I'd like to make a greeting, to greet all the elementals of this place, and to greet the elementals within us and around us. And I'd like to start by saying a short prayer. Measureless the starry heights, measureless the depths of earth, and about us everywhere, light receiving, warmed by wonder, spirits weave man's destiny. May the shelter of this house be a place of wakening, love within us, peace among us. So Rudolf Steiner, of course, everyone's spiritual path usually starts with a crisis. And when my crisis came, I looked about me. Where can I learn to get out of this place? And I was guided to the work of Rudolf Steiner. And I began to read some of his lectures, and I had that wonderful, wonderful feeling that I'm sure a lot of you have had of course, that wonderful of course moment. And I then attended many lectures at Rudolf Steiner House and became more and more interested in his work, and especially his work on the elemental kingdom and the nature spirits. Now, of course, Rudolf Steiner, he was born with a tremendous faculty to be able to see beyond the physical realm and into the supersensible spiritual realms. Even as a child, he was able to see the energies working in the ether, and he was able to connect with those who had crossed the threshold of death. And not only was he born with this tremendous faculty, he was also had a wonderful logical mind as well. And he attended the Technical University in Vienna and was a great scientist as well. He trained his mind to work in a scientific way. So he had full knowledge of all the sciences. And in his biography, he talks about how difficult it was when he was working with geology to have these names for the different rocks, the different substances, because he knew these as living beings, as sensations. And he had to keep going back, sometimes up to 40 times, to go back and work out what the names were. Have a quick gulp of the Undines. And so he then, as he developed throughout his life this ability to see into the supersensible realms, became greater and greater. And he used his scientific training to speak with absolute precision about what he saw beyond the material world. And his his real raison d'etre and his plea to humanity was to say that the laboratory table must once more become an altar, and a spiritual science must work alongside physical science, and this supersensible science must be taken absolutely seriously. The laboratory table to be treated as an altar. And we can see that the miscreations all around us, because the loving reverence has been disregarded, or people are simply ignorant of the loving reverence and the living nature of the ether and the beings who inhabit it. Now, Rudolf Steiner, 100 years before many of the, what I call the post-materialist scientists that are very much at the forefront at the moment, really wonderful, big characters like Nassim Haramein, Bruce Lipton, and Paul Laviolette, these wonderful, imaginative scientists who have all spoken openly about their spiritual experiences and have had the courage. For instance, Nassim Haramein has actually had the courage to talk about beings in his lectures on physics. But Rudolf, and for instance, Nassim Haramein, his main thrust is space defines matter. And of course, Bruce Lipton has been a great voice behind the epigenetics, which looks at how the environment influences the behavior of cells. And Paul Laviolette, he's done this wonderful research into the ancient creation sciences, which conceives that all physical form is sustained by an undercurrent of process, a flux of vital energy that is present in all regions of space. Now, these are all modern warriors at the front of the new physics. But of course, Rudolf Steiner was talking about these matters 100 years before. And he was describing science and matter. He said, matter does not create forms. It harmoniously fills the contours organized by the action of invisible and intelligent forces. So what are these forces? Are they soulless forces that just happen to exist in a soulless universe? Rudolf Steiner saw these as a whole choir of spiritual beings, from the highest hierarchies down to the elemental kingdom. And in amongst this intelligent mass of consciousness, we existed. And Leo pointed this out yesterday. And I'm going to give a quotation by Rudolf Steiner, which I find one of the most powerful things I've seen him write. And if a being with eyes organized like those of the present day had looked at Earth, he would not yet have been able to see man. Man was still a spirit being. He floated as a spirit round the earth and took into himself the finest substances from the environment of the earth. Then gradually he densified so far that he could descend to where the earth had already become solid. And man was not born as he is today, but he was, so to say, brought forth out of Mother Earth herself. We and the earth were one. And deep, deep in our psyche and deep in our souls is this wound of separation. But of course we had to separate for our journey of evolution. In our ancient past, there was no need to have science because subject and object were one. When subject and object parted, then subject would observe object. So this great separation lives deeply within us. But of course now there is this great call for oneness, the science of oneness, because we're ready and we're yearning to be part of this oneness again. And there's many, many ways of understanding what it is to be a human being in the middle of this oneness. So many ways. And what I found really interesting and helpful, and how I found a path to understanding this oneness, is to understand the space between you and me, the space between me and a tree, you and the tree, as an area filled with elemental beings. And of course, the living cooperation of the nature spirits is the definition of the etheric life body of the earth. And what the elemental beings and nature spirits have called into the world is the last reverberation of the creative, formative, cosmic word, which underlies all activity and all existence. So this science of oneness, how do we move out of this, the solid? How do we step over from the physical world and the sciences that use their physical sensors and probes? How do we move into the realm of the nature spirits and the elementals? How do we understand them? All of us have these organs of perception, these fine organs of perception. But of course, our Western education systems do not teach us how to awaken these organs of perception. And they can extend beyond the ordinary senses, and they can be trained in a scientific way. And this discipline can accompany us when we cross the frontiers of natural science. And it's a methodology that we can take and use in the disciplines of science. Now, Rudolf Steiner gave many indications on how to develop these organs of perception. His book, 6 Steps to Self-Development, give these exercises with which to awaken these senses, these human senses. And while the microscope's sensors and probes can go so far, a human being is a much more complex and a much more efficient sensor if we know how to awaken them. Now, with the Biodynamic Research Institute in Germany, there are many biodynamic scientists, biochemists, who have been working with Rudolf Steiner's methods to look beyond the physical into the realm of beings, into the realm of the ether, and then beyond that into the astral realm, into the realm of beings. Now we can train ourselves to look at the forms, the scintillating worlds of life, the struts, the colours, the ever scintillating, moving substance of the ether. And we can make informed decisions about plants and about foodstuffs to enhance the etheric field and the strength of food. For instance, there's a scientist called Dorian Schmidt, and they've been working at enhancing new foodstuffs and new seeds in order to make foods that can strengthen the human body to defend itself from electromagnetic pollution. Within nature, within the great book of nature, the beings of nature are waiting to be reunited with us. They are waiting to help us. If we know how to communicate with them in a systematic methodology. And they are bringing through, these scientists are working with this methodology, and they are working in this beautiful loop of reciprocity between the beings in the supersensible realms and using the indications to make foods, to make human beings stronger and to build up this etheric body to basically see off the terrorism of these nanoparticles. When I last saw Dorian Schmidt, he told us a wonderful story. Because in the West we have this obsession with double-blind testing. And when they work with the beings behind a plant, and of course there isn't just one, there's lots and lots of beings behind wheat. There is the overarching intelligence of wheat. And of course, Dorothy McLean was a wonderful seer who had tremendous conversations with the overarching beings of plants. But this is a definite science and a definite methodology, and all of us can do it. But Dorian said when he started working with the double-blind testing, that the being they were working with said, why are you asking us twice? We've already told you. But of course, science demands this rigorous experimentation. So you can take an experiment and you can have 3 people in London, somebody in Dornach, somebody in Austria, and they're all asking the same question. And then you correlate the answers rather than the same person asking twice. And now food companies are coming to them quietly to find out how they can improve their product. And a symbolism is now being developed to show the different gestures within the ether, the gestures around well water, the gestures around plants. And slowly but surely, these biochemists and these spiritual scientists are producing a body of data that shows how human beings can work with the energies within the ether and the beings behind it to produce something to lead the human line through foodstuffs, through many forms, through this turbulent and violent time we have at the moment. But of course, if one is working with this kind of science, this methodology of the ether, working in the ether and the astral, in outer science, it's possible to examine objects with little inward involvement. It's impossible to do so when you're working in the supersensible realm. One feels touched and moved by the experiences and discoveries. So you have to be the warrior. You have to lay yourself open to being moved to your knees when you step through and look into the supersensible world. And you have to have the courage to be stared at. You have to have the courage when an overarching being of a plant looks at you, when you finally find your way through into this fine, fine place. You have to be prepared to be stared at, because these beings can see everything about you. Everything in your soul is like a book to be read. And of course, people who have had a traditional scientific training, maybe you don't want to be moved. You don't want your emotions torn. You don't want to be brought to your knees, and you don't want to be stared at. You want to finish your day, shut the door, get in your car and go home. You do not want to be followed by a being that can see every secret that you have hidden away. So this new science demands that the new spiritual scientists, the supersensible scientists, it's as with all spiritual paths, it's a path of morality and above all responsibility, and not all of us can bear that responsibility. And if one is to really hone in on this, it's, am I prepared to leave certain things behind and take that jump? I mean, this morning Andy had that wonderful vision of the jump that one has to make. There's many, many jumps that we have to make, and one of them is this moral responsibility with our science. So, let's move to the realm of the elementals. And the question is, what is an elemental? Now, this question plagued me for a very long time, and I live up in the uplands of mid Wales, where the elemental kingdom is very strong. And it's very generous with its inspiration. It has given me some beautiful songs, and it's taught me some very harsh lessons. And for many years, I converted or used my spiritual experiences with the elemental kingdom, and I honed them down into something quite simple, which is a song, which is a set of verses and choruses. But if there's something you have to do in an incarnation and you're not doing it, things get very, very uncomfortable. And when I moved to Wales, I began to dance around over the rocks and the lakes until one day I nearly lost my eye on my walking stick. It began to snow, and I flicked my hood down and nearly blinded myself. And this is a classic gesture from the elemental kingdom to snap out of it and get on your path. And in many of the fairy tales, there are stories of the gnomes that try to blind the human being if they try and enter the realm of the elementals before they're ready. I think there's a Dutch one called King Kiri who tried to blind the farmers. So there were many incidences like that. And then I had this very, very strong feeling that I had to write this book about the elementals. I had to take what I had read and learnt and experienced via Rudolf Steiner's lectures on the nature spirits, and to write something to lead the skeptic up to the threshold of the elemental kingdom. That was my remit. And so for many, many days, I walked and walked and walked and walked and said, what is an elemental? What is an elemental? And finally, it came through to me what an elemental was. This is from my book. An elemental is a nexus of subtly primed consciousness and vitality, working at the junction between spirit and matter. It is a constituent part of an ever-evolving, life-giving expression of divine creation, working on the front line of physical formation. Each elemental is charged with a specific mission regarding the assemblage, cohesion, and animation of physical matter on Earth, ranging from the density of a mountain rock to the rarefied heat of a candle flame. They are created and programmed by a sublime hierarchy of advanced consciousness, who over aeons of time developed their life spirit to a point where they can create life itself and give it away. This gift of life radiates down through the octaves of manifestation and condensation and out into infinitesimal elemental parts. And an expression from the elementals would sound like this: we know what we have to do, and we do it. They are the last reverberation of the cosmic creative word before it flips from the enfolded to the unfolded. So after I was given this explanation of what an elemental kingdom was, I thought, how do I try and link this with something more physical or something in the scientific realm that has the scientific vocabulary? Because so much of this is all about finding the right vocabulary, because a word has such power when it is spoken out into the ether. And that's why, I just divert just for a few seconds, that's why it is so important when we talk about fracking or we talk about the wind farms or whatever, we say the proposed wind farms or the proposed drilling that may happen, because everything in the now is, many timelines exist. And it's so important because our words are beings. And I'll explain that a little bit later, what I mean by words are beings. So the right choice of words are so key when we are speaking our passion. So coming back to what is an elemental, and having received this explanation of what an elemental is, I then began to look around, and I looked into the work of Paul Lavioletta, who I believe spoke here a few years ago. He's particularly knowledgeable about the superwaves emanating from the center of stars. And he proposes the subquantum particle called the etheron. The elemental, the etheron. Subquantum kinetics proposes the existence of a primordial transmuting ether composed of subtle etheron particles. These continually react with one another in prescribed manners and also diffuse through space. Potentially, there may be many subquantum reactions taking place in the transmuting ether, but only a few of these may be important for describing the origin of the fields composing the matter and energy of our universe. So this vocabulary, and I will later on when we talk about the earth elementals and the gnomes and the graviton, so they're in theoretical physics, we're tiptoeing, and some of us are charging towards this threshold between that which can be measured by the probes and sensors and stepping over, taking that jump and going into life itself. So we've spoken about the elementals, these particles, and it's quite important to just define the elemental and the nature spirit. And of course the nature spirit can be the overarching nature spirit of a plant. For instance, a tree, nature spirit overlooks the earth elementals in the soil and the roots. The Undines, or the water elementals, are looking after the sap, and the Sylphs, or light bearers, are looking after the photosynthesis, and the fire beings, or fire elementals, are looking after the production of seed, or the minimization of the cosmos into a seed. So the nature spirit is looking after a marsh, a mountain, a planet, a galaxy. And there's a few brave scientists that are speaking in terms of beings now, and I have so much respect for them that they can use this word beings. And Nassim Haramein is one, and David Wilcock is another one who speaks of our galaxy being a vast personality. And when we begin to see creation in the sense of beings, this helps us to understand and feel the science of oneness. They are our co-travelers. We're all in the matrix together. And just as we are evolving and evolving fast, they are woven into this matrix to evolve as well. And they are evolving alongside us. And they are evolving through us and in us. It's one long chain, circle of elemental beings and beings of the universe. So let's start with the four elements. And when I talk about the earth beings, this is beings of solid matter, all solid matter, and with watery, everything that is liquid or fluid, not just water itself. So let's look at the elemental kingdom of matter, and we'll use the generic word gnomes. Now, of course, for many, many people outside this room, or maybe there's even some in this room, you say the word gnomes and the eyes just go. But if you said the word graviton, ooh, what's that? You know, that's interesting. What's that? Let me just give you a brief example and a brief description of what a graviton is, what theoretical physics proposes a graviton. Considered to be an elementary particle without mass or charge, a graviton is presented by the new ether physics as a mediator or carrier of the force of gravity in the quantum field, the subquantum field. Now, Rudolf Steiner, whose extraordinary ability to see into solid matter and see the elementals at work, he describes the gnomes as being the overseers of materialization and dematerialization. The gnomes must ever again create themselves anew out of gravity, because they continually stand in danger of losing their substance. So you then have this sense of gravity being held in its place and forms being held in place by these living beings. And what are they actually made of? What's their substance? Rudolf Steiner describes their substance being of sense and intellect, highly evolved and brilliant intellect. The substance of a gnome is intellect and gravity. Instant knowing a precept and a concept at the same time, holding matter in place. This programmed matter by the hierarchies, by their blue-collar workers, the gnomes. And that's why one often sees in fairy tales, you see the gnomes with huge heads. And that's just this faint echo of a spiritual reality, that these beings of solid matter are wielding and holding the intelligence of matter and its myriad expressions in place. And they're particularly prevalent under the earth along seams of metal and around crystals. So, of course, the energy lines, and especially the silica and the crystalline nature of the soil and the earth. This is particularly where you have a strong collection of the working of the gnomes. And they bring the mineral element of the earth into flux in order to conduct it to the root of plants. So they're this intelligence under the earth that are working to push the plants up. And here's a beautiful quote from Steiner. The plant gathers the secrets of the universe, sends them into the ground, and the gnomes take these secrets into themselves from what trickles down spiritually to them from the plants. The gnomes are the beings within the earth which carry the ideas of the whole universe as they stream and wander through the earth. And they are working below the bandwidth of visibility. So there again, they are pushing, they're pushing the plants up. And when the plants come up out of the ground, we come into the realm of the Undines, or the water spirits. So what are they made of? What is their substance in the ether astral? Rudolf Steiner describes their substance as dreams. They are made of dreams, and they wish to remain in a state of metamorphosis, in a state of eternal, endlessly continuing changeability. They yield themselves up to movement. So above the ground, you have the activity of the Undines and their dream. And they dream the substance of the plant. And then the plant comes in and fills the contours dreamt by the Undines. Now, of course, in shamanism, so much at the center of the shamanic practices is to enter the dream of the plant. And this is really working with the elementals, the Undines and the elementals of water and their dream. They hold this dream, and we can enter their dream once we know how to do it. Once we learn the method, we can enter their dream. They dream the leaf into being, and they're described as the world chemists. And I'm sure all of you have had that wonderful experience of being next to a waterfall after the rains and feeling that wonderful sense and life force of the water as the Undines spray, or watching the clouds come up from the river and work up the valley. This continual change of movement. And they don't have this this brilliant intelligence of the gnomes. They're much more dreamlike, and they're much more in the state of movement. Now, there's a tremendous seer called Verena von Holstein, and I have experienced this myself too when entering into water, the waterfalls, is that one comes to this point when you ask the Undines, the water spirits, may I enter your wisdom? Working into the waterfall, time slows down and the waterfall stops. And then you enter into the structure of water. So how do you do this? By going into profound gratitude, profound reverence, and love for the element of water. You practice this and practice this and practice this, and then at one point, water stops. It opens the door and it allows you in. But I'm going to quote Verena because of the beauty of her imagery. For you, water is something soft. When you consider water from the inside, it has something totally structured about it. Water looks like a network of rods, nothing but rods. Structures of sound which are spatial. You have to imagine yourself in colored spatial music. And this is what happens when you go into the water. It turns itself inside out, and you see the color, the structure, and feel the sound of water. we then move on to the Sylphs. And they're at home in the moving currents of air, and they develop their being in the music made by the moving currents of air. And their substance, Rudolf Steiner points out, is something between a human wish and willing. And one can really feel this sense of the air beings being made of will by these great turbines in the upper atmosphere that drive the storms. It's a huge amount of will. And the positioning of the planets and the message of the planets drive the elementals along the lines made by the planetary alignments. And of course, weather is also responding to humanity and the emotions that are prevalent on the earth. So you have the turbines and the will of the planets mixing with the emotional state of humanity, and also the structures we were hearing before in Frank's talk with harp. You have these many-pronged effects that are driving the weather. But the Sylphs are particularly in their beauty and in their element when they are behind the trails and behind the wings of a bird. Now, one day, quite recently, I was at a really despairing moment looking up at the sky, at the chemtrails crisscrossing. And I started using the techniques that Rudolf Steiner prescribes for looking beyond, and that you're using your chakras, your throat chakra, the heart chakra, as well as the eyes. And you then go into this realm of living color, these shimmering structures that are in the ether when you start seeing through and past physical matter. And I became even more despairing because there was no living color around these chemtrails, but dying color. And it was a dirty yellow dying color until a flock of swallows flew across the air. And behind these swallows, they were dynamizing the air with these structures, these vortices, and these swallows were changing the structure of the air and purifying the air. They were returning the Sylphs, the light being, the light bearers. They were returning the air and the Sylphs to their right and proper sphere. And when one sees something like this, and you feel it as a profound spiritual truth, your heart expands. This is not a dream. This isn't just imagination. This was a profound natural truth. And it made me laugh out loud that a flock of swallows potentially have more power than a cargo plane full of aluminium. They have an effect, a dynamizing effect on the air. So when we have this remit to do something about chemtrails or to do something about the pollution in the air, and it all becomes too much, just remember the birds, make the life of the birds, nurture the birds. That's one small step towards this, because they have the power to purify air in the etheric and then in time into the physical. So if we talk about the light bearers and the Sylphs and the air beings, they have this wonderful, wonderful moulding activity. They're bringing this starry script in. They're carrying the starlight and the sunlight to the plants, and they meet with the water spirits, the Undines, and this wonderful chemistry goes on between the Undines and the Sylphs to create and bring the life of the blossoming of the plant. Now, of course, quite recently in scientific history, we have the phenomena of the biophoton. So we have biophotons and the Sylphs. How close are they? The biophoton, which was brought into science by Fritz Albert Popp, and he's shown that this dynamic web of biophoton light is constantly being released and absorbed by the DNA in the cells of all living organisms. So how close is it to the Sylph, this biophoton? The biophoton emerging in the scientific world is a step that's taking us closer and closer and closer to the threshold between science and life itself. But to say that they're the same thing is to limit creation, and above all, we must not limit our views of creation, because there is such a will in the West to put everything under a label, to file it in a cabinet, shut the door and lock the key in case somebody changes it. When you step over the threshold into life itself, you can see that the Sylphs are showing the biophotons as an outward gesture of their work. But in order to measure biophotons, in some way you have to stress the sample. You're still in the realm of the physical probes and sensors of the microscopes. And in a way, you have to stress the little plant seedling or whatever it is that you're checking the biophoton movement, you have to stress it in some way. And it's put into this dark field in order to measure the biophotonic activity. Now, I was recently in conversation with a biophoton scientist who's also read a lot of spiritual science, and he brought through this beautiful idea. He said, to measure biophotons, you end up having to stress or injure the sample. Also, the Sylphs and the salamanders have their martyrdom in front of an artificial crystal sensor, where very specific elementals are enchanted, i.e. you have the earth elementals enchanted into the crystal sensor. The job of these earth elementals is to translate that martyrdom into an electrical current, a thing that can be measured externally. So then we come to the fire spirits. Do I have 10? 6, quick. So we then come to the fire spirits. And of course, the fire spirits, as I said earlier on, are about minimizing the cosmos into a seed. And they oversee the generation of new life. We weave the warmth that creates fruit. We minimalize the cosmos into a seed. Every plant is able to embed a large part of the microcosmos in its microcosmic seed. And the other really key thing about the fire spirits is that they incarnate into every thought we have. All knowledge exists in the universe. It already exists. Time is a release mechanism to determine what and when we are ready to learn. And so there's this living, fiery realm of thinking. And every time we think, a fire spirit is incarnated, if you like, or martyred, or incarnated into our thinking. And that's why we have these vast thought forms, huge thought forms, when masses and masses of people believe one idea or one untruth. So there's huge lies that are living in the etheric and astral realm of this planet. And they, of course, these huge lies are part of why we are having diseases in the natural world. For instance, I've recently done an experiment looking into the reasons behind the ash dieback disease. There's 19 of us working on it. And we took this question: what is one of the major reasons for ash dieback? And of course there are many reasons, like months and months of wet full moons, the position of Saturn, if you know the biodynamic calendar. But one of the major things that came through was the word lying. There are so many lies that sit in the astral realm. And what the sylphs and salamanders and elementals were giving me as a picture was dissonance of wisdom in sound, dissonance of wisdom in light that is causing this disease. And this concept of lying, I looked in the Rudolf Steiner archive and I found one jewel of a sentence. I can't remember it exactly, but the sense was this: that in our ancient past, if a man lied, the construction or the air in his larynx would collapse and he would suffocate. And of course the ash dieback is about the trees suffocating. We talk about the dissonance of wisdom in sound and the dissonance of wisdom in light. And of course these nanoparticles from the chemtrails are distorting the wisdom coming in from the sun. Because it's not just light, there's not just a chemical reaction. Rudolf Steiner pointed out very, very clearly at this time a new wave of elementals would come into the earth to help humanity in its evolution. And I would say the magicians behind the chemtrails know this. They know how to enchant and chain elementals into miscreations. But we can release them. We can release them. And I'm going to just give you this. Groups of elemental beings have felt obliged to form unions with the negative forces because of a lack of spiritual thinking among the people. If we develop the corresponding forces of love, we can free the elemental beings from their enchantment. And one of the greatest mantras that Rudolf Steiner gave was, yielding to beauty brings forth pious devotion to infinity. And through our focused love, honoring, gratitude, we can free the beings who are enchanted in the miscreations. I have so much more to say, and time goes too quickly. Thank you for your quality of listening. It really brought through the words from the elementals. If you would like to know more, my partner Satch has a book here. And if you want to come to any of our workshops where I teach these methods of awakening the organs of perception, then please come and see us. And if you're interested in knowing more, I have a book, Nature Spirits, the Remembrance, and I also have a paper by Dorian Schmidt, who is an advanced seer and biochemist working with this methodology and working with the beings behind plants. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan Raven.